We're going to talk to Sally McManus about this really extraordinary moment for the workforce. First, here is the Prime Minister with some rare praise for the ACTU Secretary.
I spoke to Sally McManus again this morning, and I want to thank her for her engagement in what is a very difficult time. They understand that, and I thank them for the way they've engaged in that discussion. There are no blues teams or red teams, or there are no more unions or bosses. There are just Australians now. That's all that matters. An Australian national interest and all Australians working together, and I thank all of those who are coming together in that spirit.
Sally McManus, welcome to the program. Look, the Prime Minister there singing your praises. How would you describe these relationships right now? No red team, blue team, no unions, no bosses. Is that how you see it?
I'll come to that, David. It's a really good question, but the first thing I think is that I'd like to acknowledge the frontline workers at the moment, in particular the healthcare workers. This week's going to see that big surge in ICU, and we're going to rely on all those hospital workers, right through from the cleaners all the way through. And Australia's biggest, and some would say toughest union, the Nurses Union, is going to be on the front line of that, as well as all the other essential workers that are working. I think that it was an extraordinary moment last week, and we congratulate the government for their announcement. It was a right announcement, the wage subsidy one, as well as a childcare announcement, and the private hospitals too. They made really good decisions. I wouldn't say there's no unions, and I can assure the working people of Australia the trade union movement is still here and in their corner. Having said that, the fact that we're now consulting with the government means that better decisions get made because you're listening to more voices.
Now, you've welcomed the JobKeeper package. Should Parliament pass it quickly on Wednesday?
Well, we've got concerns about it, and obviously we've been raising those publicly and obviously privately with the government. Some of them go to who's covered by it. So, first of all, casuals. There's about 1.1 million casuals that will miss out on this payment because they haven't had 12 months continuous service. Now, there's lots of casual workers that may have work that's on and off, but it's regular. So arts and entertainment, construction industry, all of those places. Or you might have just started work this year, come back into the workforce and you're working regular hours. Those people need to be covered too. And then of course, there's all the visa workers. And when we think about Australian workers or anyone working in Australia, we've got to make sure they're not left to starve as well. So those issues we're advocating. The other concern we've got is there's a push by the government to change the Fair Work Act. We do not believe this is necessary. We've demonstrated it's not necessary. There's been changes to awards last couple of weeks covering millions of workers. And we're worried that if you change the rights of workers, unfortunately, some employers might abuse that.
All right, we'll come to that. Let's start with the concern around casuals. More than 1 million casuals miss out because, as you point out, you have to have been tied to the employer for 12 months or more. Do you have to draw the line somewhere, though? What about casuals who've only just been with an employer for a couple of weeks?
I think it's reasonable to draw the line somewhere, absolutely. I think the best way of thinking about it is if you could have reasonably expected to be working, if it were not for the coronavirus, then you should get the JobKeeper allowance. Unfortunately, in our country, we've become so dependent on casual work, and so many employers would have had their casual workers working. Think about all the universities. More than 50% of the workers there are casual workers, and they won't get that allowance unless it changes.
So where would you draw that line?
Based on that principle, and that principle is actually a legal one, about whether you could have reasonably expected to be working. So that is because either you had shifts booked or you've been promised that you'd be working. There's a reasonableness test to it. And I think that would mean you'd pick up on all those people that, had already banked on the fact they'd have a job this year.
The government didn't put any limit, though, around how many hours a week you have to work. So you are going to have presumably quite a few casuals who may, students and so on, who may only do a shift or two a week. Suddenly they're going to get the full $1,500 a fortnight, more than they currently earn. Do you have an issue with that?
Well, it's a unique system our government's brought in. It's similar to the New Zealand one, a flat rate. So there's swings and roundabouts. Yes, it's true that lower paid workers and people who aren't full-time workers some of them will get more than they would have got. But it also means that higher paid workers will be getting much, much less than they would have got under, for example, the UK or the Danish system, where it's around 80 or 70% of wages. So, you know, you've got to take those swings and roundabouts, and trade union movements just willing to make this the best system we possibly can.
You raised the